Hello again, this is UML Operator. All right, in this session, which is 7.2, part 2 of the part 7 series, say that 3 times, huh? And the reason we broke them up is because we want to try to keep the video as short as possible, down 30 minutes or less. Hopefully I'm successful this time around, all right? So in the last few sessions, we have touched on BPMN1 and BPMN2. We've exposed elements, their properties, and their uses. We have demonstrated how to model BPMN and choreography diagrams. We have shown how BPMN as an industry standard can be integrated between Sparks, Enterprise Architect, EA, and other platforms such as Camunda. We demonstrated BPMN development in Sparks EA, and then we did the same in Camunda, and then we went back again. So reverse engineered back and forth between these platforms. Then we demonstrated requirements engineering starting a project, and that's what part 7 is within this series. We started doing some requirements development. We built out a choreography diagram to support further requirements, engineering, elicitation, specification, validation, and eventually analysis. So we displayed alignment with industry standard frameworks. I should say we also displayed alignment with other industry standards such as TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture. And we've done much more, and we will continue to do more as we proceed in this channel on model-driven anything. So our objectives all along have been to focus on UML and its extensibility. And while using BPMN, our objectives have been to bring what we have shared in this channel and show you how you too can deliver freely at your own pace and level, and the objectives you have, whether you're in business or technology, or simply modeling your own visions. Sparks EA is the best because it is built on an open database, allowing you to model your thoughts, your intelligence, your data, and then use that intelligence how you please. All right, in this session, we're going to take the simple project that we started. We started developing some requirements from a very simple scope document provided to us by the client. We generated or elicited or developed about a handful of requirements just from the nouns and verbs that were in that scope document. And then we started building out, let me go back here, a types library. Now, the types library, gives us things like our architecture building blocks, getting an idea here. We're not using BPMN elements. We're using component deployment elements out of the UML spec. In this case, we're using BPMN type elements to start identifying our actors, our participants, our resources, and other actors that we'll add in as we're developing this project and delivering it. We started a roles catalog so that we could understand the roles, use categories, category values. Those are also BPN types that we've talked about in this session. We started a service function catalog to expose data objects, input and output sets, and things that we're going to use to support our BPMN or choreography diagram. This also allowed us to start looking at our technology architecture. And again, we're using BPMN types here to identify the technologies. We'll get into our interfaces and operations as we move forward. And then finally, to start using the BPMN2 elements to identify our data architecture, right? So whether we're talking about data in, data out, what our data stores are, and maybe some other characteristics of assignment and item definition as we're moving through our data definitions, a part of our architecture. All right. And then we started extending the choreography diagram that we've developed and talked about in this session over the last few episodes. And we're going to further develop requirements or try to understand, or what I like to say, shoot holes through this diagram and make sure that we thoroughly understand as many aspects of this model as possible. We also worked on a glossary, and we actually used the glossary model to define and understand some elements. Now, this one came in for the most part with the help from Sparks, from their guidelines and the templates that they have. And we talked about that in the last video as well. So this is what we're going to cover in this session. So let's hit the ground running and again, try to keep this as short and as simple as possible. So requirements management is the key to any delivery exercise. And when we're talking about requirements, we're just not talking about requirements that need to be developed for the project or the delivery itself. We're talking about understanding all the business requirements, functional requirements, testing requirements, all the requirements. So we start with requirements management. In the last session, or I should say between the last session and this session, I built out a namespace for start and end event requirements. And we just put some simple requirements in here to understand those. I also created a namespace for intermediate events, a namespace for decision events, and we're going to get into the choreography diagram and show the relevance of these, as well as a requirements namespace or folder for the various tasks that we're going to be representing in this area. So these are all done by using the navigation cells in Spark, so you can very quickly navigate over the namespaces, the packages to understand. I also created a pending namespace. Now, we're going to talk about this as we get into the BPMN model, how we're developing these requirements internally to the elements as before we move those externally to their various namespaces within our requirements management ecosystem. So let's start with our order processing choreography diagram that we've been using, all right? And let's go to our favorite workspace layout, most productive. And that for me, I created properties, notes, and inspector. We talked about inspector. We're focused over here on the right side quite a bit in the last video. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on that. But as we're selecting elements, we start to drive down into the data, the metadata under the elements to see whether, what the relationships are. We can get into traceability as we go into particular elements. We're able to look at any constraints, if any of those are developed, and also any scenarios. So we're very quickly able to get to various scenarios that we have named and have built for each element as we're going through. And I've pre-done some scenarios in order to speed this video up, right? So let's just go ahead, double click on this element and open up the properties for this start event element. So we can see that we created 3 requirements internally, and then we move them externally to the requirements management namespace. And we created a start and end event namespace or folder for our collection of these requirements, all right? Now, when it came to scenarios, we defined a scenario using our use case template, if you will, to understand the various aspects of the scenario from a use case perspective. And then we use structure editor to start defining the steps within these scenarios. And then from here, we developed some activity diagrams to support our understanding, some simulations. We created a sequence diagram, and we created a state diagram based off of the intelligence that we added during building or structuring this scenario. Cover this in another video. I'm not going to get into it, but we are going to look at the diagrams relevant to the start event. So in Inspector, let's start at the top and work down what we currently have. So we've selected the start event, clear by what's up here, right? We're able to look at the properties using this workspace layout and understand what the start event is and any properties that we've added for the start event. We're able to look at the relationships. There's a control flow work request coming in from a choreography diagram. There is a note link, that's this one right here, relevant to some additional information, and we'll get to that in a moment. There's realization association relevant to a requirement, realization from another requirement, and realization from another requirement. And if you remember, these are the requirements that we developed internally to the element, and then we move them externally. So from here, we're able to go to where the requirements are, and let's see if we can do this. We can bring a requirement in, drag and drop it anywhere we want. As we're having a conversation saying, hey, the first requirement is dealing with customer orders, and then over in the notes section, you can further define this as you're working with your stakeholders or generating your own intelligence. We can drill down into the requirement itself, and we can do the same thing. We can change metadata properties over here. In fact, we can even create requirements for this requirement, child requirements for the custom requirements. And most of the time, we refer to these as detailed requirements. We may get into functional and non-functional requirements relevant to this specific requirement. We can even start building and structuring scenarios to support how a particular requirement may work. All right, let me remove this requirement from this diagram here, and let's select the start element again. What we're going to do is we're going to hit Alt-G to very quickly find this in the project browser so that we're on this right now. We're going to expand that, and we're going to look at an activity diagram that we auto-generated for this particular work effort. Now, in this case, I can either go back to properties diagram, my common workspace layout, and have the tool open, the windows open that I want to use to run through this. So let me explain this for a second. So we auto-generated this from the start element. And again, we used structured editor in order to generate this. We generated some exception handling that's in here. And we basically, as you've seen in the how to do this video, we selected activity and it auto-generated this model, right? And then we can do whatever we want in this model. We can develop other requirements. In this case, from this element, we generated a requirement which we moved externally. Now, this is a functional or a technical requirement specific to JavaScript object notation, JSON, just stating that, hey, the question came up from the stakeholders. So what technology or what approach are we going to use for exchanging objects between each other? And we basically put a requirement in the ground, a stake in the ground, that this was going to be using JSON. And then what I typically do is I go into layout and I color an element stating that, okay, we have created a requirement in this and we've moved it externally to the pending namespace. So here I can hit Alt-G, very quickly find the requirement that we're talking about within the pending namespace. See how fast and quick this is? Practice yourself and you're going to see the power of using this method approach. So we went through the activity elements. These are activity elements. The fork means behavioral, and you learned that in previous sessions, right? So what we're going to do now, as we're going through this, you can see, well, we had some questions on how we're going to deal with fallout. We had some questions on how we're going to deal with logging events, right? And let's just, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, when you create an activity diagram, you can come in here, right-click anywhere in the diagram, you get a pop-up, execute simulation. We're going to use manual simulation. And we're going to step through this particular model. It reaches a decision point and it says, well, what is the decision that's driving this? Valid, invalid response received. Let's go down this path. So we're able to go down this path and we can see that it goes to a logging event and then it ends, right? Then what it does is immediately goes into the choreography simulation. And you can see at this particular point, we're using manual. It is stopping at the can. This is the order gateway, by the way, but we've called it can fulfill order. We've given this gateway, this topic within our Kafka bus architecture for this particular gateway, but we'll get into that more as we're going through. Like, for instance, how did I know we were going to use Kafka? Are we going to use Confluent Kafka, or are we going to use our own implementation of Apache Kafka? Doing this helps you not only flush out the business requirements, the non-technical requirements, but also your functional, your testing requirements. And we'll get to the testing in just a moment, which to me is one of the most powerful aspects of using this approach to delivering anything. All right, let me go ahead and cancel this simulation. Let's roll back to our activity diagram. So as we're going through the various simulations, of course, you can rinse and repeat, follow a different exception or alternate path or decision points, and ask questions. How does this work? How is it going to work? How is it not going to work? You can ask those questions and start developing other requirements. All right, let's go ahead and close this. No, I don't need to save it. We're back over here. I'm going to select Start, Alt-G key to instantly find it in the browser. And then, so we looked at the diagram for the start activity event, and we created a sequence diagram. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at not the activity, we're going to look at the sequence diagram for this particular model. So I'm going to take the basic path and we're going to start there. So essentially from the same scenario, and let me go to, it's probably faster and easier to go to our properties notes layout, as I keep telling you all. So in this particular case, we're able to flip to inspector, details, come back over here, select this, minimize this. We have scenarios. We're going to go ahead and double click this to launch the structure editor. I like to have the structure editor to the right of my diagram. So I'm going to put it over the properties so that I'm able to look at it. All right. So in this particular case, we came up here, we said, hey, we want to select or build a sequence diagram, right? And then if the diagram already exists, it will override it. But we're going to cancel, go to Start, go to Browser. We still have it selected, and we're going to go through. So we have a sequence diagram that's just dealing with this exception event, which is 2A as step 2, and this exception event or alternate event for 2B. Hey, it's valid. So we look at it. Hey, it's valid, and let's continue on. So let's go back to the basic one, move this out a little bit more. And you can see auto generates a very simple sequence diagram. And again, you can come in, double click these objects, ask questions, elicit more requirements. And among requirements too, there's also, you're going to be eliciting, well, what are the assumptions? And everything starts really with an assumption and then hopefully turns into a requirement, but it may turn into a risk. It may turn into a security requirement or problem, regulatory, and I could go on and on. So we basically come in, you literally might even ask the question here, and then come back in and edit it with the answer. And you may then come back in and say, well, the type here is an assumption. Now I don't have an assumption type. I can auto-generate an assumption type, right? And I show you how to do that in other videos as well, right? So there's lots that you can do here while you're using simulation, while you're using auto model generation using Spark's Enterprise Architect. The other thing that you can do when you're simulating and stepping through your particular models is you can add links, and I show you how to do this in previous videos, to other models. So this gives me very quick access to this activity diagram from the start event. So I can very quickly get to it. And again, I have a multi-monitor setup, so I'm able to bring up these models in other diagrams and then or focus on them while doing a presentation or a collaboration session with stakeholders in this project delivery. So we're going to go back to our common layout, and then we're going to run through the simulation for this particular project. All right, back to this layout, and what I want to do is just right-click in here, execute, run manual simulation. So when you're working in requirements development, we're going to come to this first decision point. This order gateway is what this decision point is. It's just called can fulfill order object, and we'll come up with a better topic name when we start to actually build out the bus. But the first thing we're going to do is follow the happy path. Probably folks are going to say, no, let's follow the unhappy path and get some requirements there. But this first one is going to be following the happy path. So you can see that it's running down through this decision point here, and it's saying, hey, are the parts available? Yes or no? Or again, we're following the happy path. Yes. So you can see what's going to happen. It's going to throw to A, right? This is a throw, and this A up here is a catch. Watch what happens. It basically stops. Unless you draw a flow from your, throw and catch elements, and you learned about throw and catch in the previous episode, you can see the property over here is catch. Let me move it out here so I'm not going too fast, right? Is a catch. If we look at this one's a throw, all right? So throw and catch. So what we just did was we drew a line from this throw to this catch. Let's see what happens when we're doing simulation. And I'm not going to keep this in here because I don't need it, but we're going to run this again. Let me save this. I don't think I need to save, but bad habit, I guess. Maybe it's a good habit, right? So we're going to run it again. Again, capacity. Can we fulfill the order? Let's go this path, right? Goes down here. We're going to throw to A, and it goes to A, and then it runs through, if we're looking at simulation, the final outcome. But I'm not in my simulation layout, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move to my simulation workspace layout and run this again. Right, in this particular case, I want to clear the results in the simulation. I have my notes here, my local variables here. I have I also have an inspector available, pan and zoom and browser, but I'm going to have locals. That's the default. I have features here, simulation events here, and my call stack here, whether I need it or not, right? And what we're going to do is click in here, control, and just roll the mouse up, so I can see more of the model. Maybe I want to be in pan and zoom, but we'll see that in a moment, right? So we're going to right click, and then we're going to run the simulation again. So now we're going through, you can see the simulation steps. We have our dialogue and our decision point pops up. Again, we're going to take this path. I consider it the happy path, right? Then we're going to run through to this point. We're going to throw an exception. That's going to lead to A because the answer is yes, right? So then we're going to hit OK. Because we have a sequence flow, it flows there, and you can see it runs through the remainder to the end event, and the simulation is ended. I didn't need anything here, call stack, or this. I just needed the simulation window in order to do this. All right, so let's move back to our common layout. And we're going to do this again. So it's in our common layout. We're in I can use pan and zoom or hit control home and it'll go up to the top. I can use fit, best it can. I can zoom in, anything that I want. I can even zoom down to further levels. So in here again, we're going to run the simulation, but this time we're going to go to simulate and we're going to bring up the simulator. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this. We're going to you can select anywhere you want. You can select the diagram. I just always select the start event. I'm going to right click in here, execute simulation, left click on manual. And what it's doing now, you can see in simulation, you can follow the steps. It stops at the can fulfill order, and the alias that we have for this is order gateway. And we're going to go ahead and take the default, which is the top one, and we're going to throw the exception. And we have an association, and it's running from the throw to the catch, and then it ends, right? So I'm able to, at particular points, stop and say order confirmation, click on it, and then I can see in inspector either trace what implements it. I have a requirement that's already developed that's realizing this. I can look either direction on any of the items that I'm inspecting the details. I can look at the transitions from. I can find what I'm focused on in any diagram. In this case, it's this diagram. Order transitions to the order element that we're focused on, and so on. Now, the reason it keeps coming back to A is because I'm inspecting A, right? So let's see, what else do I need to cover? I'm getting a lot of questions as I've demonstrated this and gone through. Now, I do want to remove this flow. I don't need it. I know that it's throwing from this A and it's catching here. It's the only catch point. It's the only catch point. See, this is the type property name. There's two that are just named A. There's two that are throws. And if you remember in the last video, I can double click in this diagram. I can use alias if available. We're going to turn that. And I can see, oh, this A event is message in. This A event is message out. Same with this one, message out. And then you can start asking questions. Like, for instance, what's the gateway? What's the gateway made of? Are there any constraints? Just continue as you're going through your simulation exercises to better understand the requirements as you're developing them. And again, I'm using the coloring. You can see down here the team had questions on the manufacturer elements. So 2 requirements so far have been developed and they've been externalized to the requirements management namespace. All right, which we can go all the way back up here, lots of different ways, and get back to that and then understand where these particular requirements are. I like to drag and drop them as we're validating. So remember, requirements is made up of elicitation, analysis, specification, and validation. And it's iterative, so it's not in any order. You may have a requirement that you've already elicited and you're trying to validate it, analyze it, and then you can get to a point where you can further specify the requirement and then move it to a formal state. So anything in pending is just hanging out there for a further analysis, further validation by the team. And then when you're doing requirements management, you can move it to a more formal delivery space, right? And I cover this in more videos, detailed requirements, requirements engineering. I included a link down in a short video that I made last year on the subject, but it's mission critical. I walk into too many projects, and you've heard me whine about this before, where they're not even 10% into the actual requirements necessary to deliver the project. And then they wonder why they're stalled, they're over budget, over schedule, all the problems that exist in many of the projects that I walk into, and I'm sure you're experiencing the same problems. It all boils down to understanding all your requirements, your as is, which is current mode, and your to be, and these modeling exercises, these simulations, help you achieve faster, more effective, and better delivery. Darn it, I went over 30 minutes again. So I'm going to end the video here. As we complete this set of models, I'm going to expose the XML file for this sample project on our Discord channel. We haven't launched it yet. We're still working with our legal as well as our team here to determine what we want to expose and how we want to use Discord to help you all learn faster and more effectively. So I'll let you know in a future video when we're launching Discord. I will include the link in that video, and I look forward to seeing you there as well. All right. So until the next session, the next episode, happy modeling.